My name is Rick Jones, presenter of St George's Talks. In lockdown, we went virtual and now present the talks to both a real audience here at St George's and a virtual one at home in their pyjamas. Themes reflect the history of St George's, which was once the hub of a community of German migrant workers. Now, I'm getting some hand signals here. What is...
I think our...
We have to move the cursor across to here.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's okay, I'll do
Doing
it.
it backwards. Just got it.
No,
It's not shit, doesn't appear, is it?
no.
When it gets, hang on, I've done this before.
Just a small technical hitch while the recording acknowledged that the people in the meeting are seeing a box saying,
Maybe
but the cursor is not.
That wasn't the right button. Let's see.
No, I think we might be able to do it now.
Can't see the cursor at all, no?
Yeah.
Oh, there it is.
Does that go across into the?
Ah,
yes. It
yes.
does.
Got it.
Great. So if you start the presentation again.
So that was what they were seeing, those colours.
You just need to go back here and click presentation.
Yeah, no, but the problem right.
So let's do that. Okay, let's just see whether we're still showing that screen.
Right.
It's not showing, so you can just reshare the screen.
So I need to. I need to go into the Zoom call. Right.
Yeah.
You're still in. Just need to reshare the screen. There we go.
Right. Okay.
So there we are. As I was saying, this is a wonderful old East London German church, German Lutheran church, hardly changed since 1763 when it was built, still with its old box pews, its galleries, its wheezy organ, and its coat of arms, which is the theme for this evening. Our speaker is a lawyer who for 37 years looked after patent litigation for the same law firm. And that's the law that deals with intellectual property, as lawyers say today, the rights concerning our identity. So there is no one better placed to talk to us of coats of arms. He is to boot a blue badge guide and lecturer who loves art, architecture, and world history, in which he was a graduate from Oxford many moons ago. History, that is, the last one. Will you welcome, please, Rowan Freeland?
Yeah. If both of you can clap, thank you very much. Right. I'm sorry about all the technical hitches at the beginning. Let's keep our fingers crossed that we're all sorted now. And we start off by looking at the royal arms that are above my head up here. And you make it even better on the screen than you do looking up in real life because the pulpit hides it. But this is a coat of arms of a King of England. And just in the first part of this talk, we're going to look at the components of this coat of arms and understand where they all come from, so that when you see a coat of arms like this, you can get a rough idea as to which king or kings it relates to. Let's look at a slightly better picture of it. Let's just quickly run through some of the technicalities. This coat of arms is called an achievement. The whole picture, the shield and all the things that go on around it. The coat of arms itself is just the shield. Sorry, that bit there. It's on an escutcheon, because in heraldry, we talk bad French, and escutcheon is bad French for a shield. And then above it, you always have a helmet. Even if you're a commoner, you still have a helmet. You can have mantling, which relates to the cloth that crusading knights used to put over their armor to shield it from the sun. And the mantling is always shown in strips because it's been cut around by their enemies' swords. And anybody can have mantling. Anybody can have a crest. This is the crest of the British kings. So it's a lion with a crowned lion. And then you have things that you can only get if they've been specially granted. Supporters, people to hold your shield upright, you only get if you've been allowed to have supporters. An order, if you're a member of something like the Order of the Garter, Order of the Bath, Order of the British Empire, you can have a symbol relating to that on your achievement. And then at the bottom you have a motto. And if you're English, you can have whatever motto you like and there's no control. And if you're Scottish, you can only have a motto if it's part of your coat of arms as granted. Anyway, let us look in a little more detail at the coat of arms itself. So here is the coat of arms above the pulpit in this chapel, and it is in 4 parts. And we can see we're going to start off with fleur-de-lis, because those, as many of you will know, come from the Kingdom of France. And the legend goes that they're probably inspired by a flag iris. And the story goes that flag irises like this grow along the River Lys, L-Y-S, in Belgium, hence the flower of the River Lys. And in about 500 AD, King Clovis of the Franks was in battle near the River Lys, and he was pushed back against the river, and he was going to be trapped between his enemies and the river. But he saw growing in the middle of the river a bank of irises, and that told him that there must be a ford, that the river must be shallow enough to grow irises, and if it's shallow enough to grow irises, it's shallow enough for a soldier to go across it. And so he was able to escape, and he adopted the fleur-de-lis as his symbol from then on. So the fleur-de-lis is a very ancient symbol, and you can see it on the shield against the blue background of the river, showing King Clovis the way to his escape. If we look on the other side, let's look at these 3 lions. And these are the lions of England, and they go back to Richard Coeur de Lion, Richard I. And he was king just when heraldry was starting, or formal heraldry. And in his first great seal, he was in 1189, his shield is depicted with a lion. It's actually pointing the wrong way. So probably that shield had 2 lions facing each other across the middle of the shield. 10 years later, his shield has 3 lions pass on, that's walking, if you like, and you can see them on the right there. There's a picture of those 3 lions by Matthew Paris in 1250, the monk historian. And those 3 lions, they're actually called leopards in heraldic language. A lion passant gardant. Gardant means it's looking out at you. You're seeing its face full on, not in profile. And that's always referred to as a leopard for reasons which I'm sure somebody in the Middle Ages thought were really sensible, but the reasons are now forgotten. But this coat of arms was used by the kings of England from Richard I all the way through to Edward III. In heraldic language, it's on the slide there, gules, 3 lions passant gardant in pale or, armed and langed azure, which means it's red, it's got 3 lions, they're pacing, we'll come to what that means in gardant later. They're in pale, which means they're one above the other rather than in a triangle shape. They're gold, that's the word or, and they're armed, they've got claws and tongue, which is blue. Anyway, Edward III, as many people know, claimed the French throne, and so he quartered his coat of arms with the throne that he was claiming, with the French fleur-de-lis, which we've seen earlier. He did that all the way through until 1360, He then, having beaten the French at the Battle of Crécy and thereafter, he made a peace at the Treaty of Bretigny and agreed to drop his claim. So for 9 years, he went back to the Leopards by themselves. And then he thought, sod this for a lark, I'm going back to war with the French. And he added the French fleur-de-lis on again. And his brother used the same coat of arms as his father. And you can see it's quarterly, so it's divided into quarters, and the first and fourth are azure, which means blue, seme of fleur-de-lis, or which means the fleur-de-lis are scattered like seeds. Seme means to scatter seeds in French. And you know the other bit already. Then, when Henry IV came to the throne, as we know, he booted out Richard II, and he wanted to make a change. And a number of years before, the French had rationalized their coat of arms. And so instead of being seme, scattered with fleur-de-lis all over, they just went down to having 3 arranged in a triangle like this. And Henry IV is one that incorporated that new French fleur-de-lis into the English coat of arms, claiming his French, with his claim to the French throne. And that arrangement of fleur-de-lis and leopards in quarters like that remained from Henry IV, 1399, all the way to the end of the reign of Queen Elizabeth. So that was a very lengthy period. Henry VI did change them slightly because he was crowned King of France, and Mary obviously married Philip of Spain, and so she quartered her arms with, or impaled her arms with the Kingdom of Spain. But essentially, those are the English royal arms all the way through until the death of Queen Elizabeth. One important thing is Queen Elizabeth used a different motto to nearly everybody else. She used Semper Eadem, always the same. And so if you see a coat of arms with Semper Eadem, if this style, just the 4 quarterings there, that's Queen Elizabeth. The others all had, to the extent they used the motto in those days, Dieu et mon droit, God and my right, which is the British motto today. So that, if we come back to the coat of arms we're looking at above the pulpit, we've dealt with the fleur-de-lis, we've got these leopards here, and there's just 2 bits we want to look at. We want to look at the Scottish lion and the Irish harp. So let's have a quick look at them. These came in, well, the Scottish lion, first of all, it's gold background with a lion rampant, so it's up in the, standing up with its arms in the air. It's red, it's got a blue tongue and claws. And the jolly bit is that it's in this like rather pretty frame. And the lion rampant in Scotland goes all the way back to a king called William the Lion in the late 1100s. And then his son Alexander III started using them. And if you look at the red border, look at the corners there, they're fleur-de-lis on the corners. And those are said to represent the old alliance with France. But unfortunately, they started using this border 50 years before Scotland first made an alliance with France. So they actually chose the border in anticipation, no doubt, because the Scots are very canny of the fact that in 50 years' time, they were going to make a treaty with France. And then we come on to the Irish. The Irish coat of arms. This is very unusual. The harp is a symbol of the biblical King David, and it appears in heraldry quite rarely. And nobody really knows how the Kingdom of Ireland got associated with a harp, possibly because Irish coins in the 1200s had a little triangle on them, basically because it was an easy shape to make if you're a fairly primitive mint. And the triangle, if you look at the harp, you can imagine how that if you represented a harp rather badly, it would look like a triangle. and the harp on the Irish coat of arms could be reverse derived from the triangle. But that's and if you do a bit of more research, you find endless references to bardic poems about Irish kings, none of whom I can pronounce, which they say relates to the Irish harp. But whatever happens, the Irish harp then and the Scottish lion both got incorporated into the English coat of arms by James I when he became king in 1603. So what he did is he took the English coat of arms with the fleur-de-lis and the leopards, and then he quartered them with the throne of Scotland, with the lion and the harp for Ireland. And just so if you see the list of kings and queens who use this, William III is in brackets because he had his own special coat of arms, which I'll show in a moment. And Anne has her own because she also, like Queen Elizabeth, used Semper Eardem. So if you see Semper Eardem on a coat of arms, it could be Queen Anne, but the Queen Anne one has the Scottish lion and the Irish harp, as well as the English symbols. And the one that always puzzled me was the Commonwealth, because after they cut off Charles I's head, we didn't have a king. And so they actually used coats of arms like this with the national symbols. So the cross of St. George and the harp of Ireland at the beginning of the Commonwealth. In 1654, they finally made peace with Scotland, and Scotland got brought into the protectorate. And so we had the English cross of St. George quartered with the St. Andrew's cross and the Irish harp, and in the middle a shield, which is a lion derived from the coat of arms of Oliver Cromwell. You see these very, very rarely, if at all, because after the Commonwealth, they were all taken down again. But then we have, these are the coats of arms back to England, Scotland, and Ireland. I said I'd show you William III. There he is on the right. And what he's done is he's put the Dutch royal coat of arms in the middle. So the Dutch also have a lion. For some reason, kings, well, everybody in heraldry likes having lions. And so the Dutch coat of arms is a golden lion rampant, essentially the same as the Scottish one, only a different color. And it's got these little billets, these little golden rectangles scattered over the background of the shield, which is something that enables you to identify a Dutch royal coat of arms used by William III in England on the English national coat of arms. When Queen Anne took over, she started off with the same coat of arms. So you have the picture we've been looking at all the way through. But then in 1707, we had the Act of Union, when the English and the Scottish crowns were combined. So rather than just being one person who happens to be King of England and King of France, we had one King of England and King of Scotland, sorry. You had the two kingdoms were combined to make the United Kingdom, and they redid the coat of arms. So now England and Scotland are combined because that's the crown in one person. We kept the claim to France, but we put that separately on the coat of arms, and we keep Ireland there on the right, on the bottom left. And you can see we're now getting closer to the coat of arms that we can see above the pulpit. But we've just got this rather strange picture in the bottom right-hand corner. So that actually relates to the electorate of Hanover. So this goes to the Georges. And the electorate of Hanover has got four elements. The first element is two lions passant, which actually look just like the English royal arms. And that is not a surprise because they come from the son of Queen Matilda of England, who became the ruler of Brunswick in the early Middle Ages. And so because he was a junior, he wasn't a king, he only took two of the three lions, but he used that as his shield. Then we have a blue lion rampant, and that's for Lunenburg, and that is, in fact, the blue lion rampant is the coat of arms of the King of Denmark. So if you go to Denmark, you have a blue lion on a golden background with these red hearts scattered around. The red hearts were originally lily pads, but they have a romantic turn of mind in Denmark, so they now think of them as hearts. And because the Duke of Lunenburg had married a princess of Denmark, they adopted the Danish royal arms. In the bottom, we have a white horse, and that is because Vidikund, who was the last pagan ruler of the old Saxons in the 700s AD, he had a black horse as his emblem. And when he was christened to become a Christian, he changed the color of his horse from black to white. And so then they have for Westphalia, which was the country which he ruled, his white horse was adopted as the arms. And then in the middle, we have a crown, which is in fact represents the fact that the electors of Hanover were also the arch treasurers of the Holy Roman Empire. And then that, you see, gets put into the coat of arms that we see above the pulpit. And it was used by the first three Georges up until 1801. And there we are, we can see, and when you're trying to date a coat of arms, a royal coat of arms, the bottom right is the bit to look at, the bit here, because if it's got the Hanoverian things, you know, it's George's. If it doesn't have the Hanoverian things, but Scottish line, it's the Tudors. But then in 1801, we abandoned our claim to the throne of France. While they were embarking on negotiations with the French that led to the Treaty of Utrecht. No, the Peace of Amiens, sorry. And one of the things the British indicated they were willing to do is to give up the claim to France. And they realized, first of all, the French couldn't care less, and they didn't have a king by this stage anyway. And the English didn't care less either. So what George did is he got rid of the, I apologize for that, sorry. We got rid of the French coat of arms. We separated out the English and the Scottish, and we put the Hanoverian shield in the middle, and sitting on top of it, there's the electoral bonnet. And that operated for 15 years from 1801 to 1816. And if you see that, it's quite, you can get quite, if you're a heraldry nerd, you can get quite excited because that's one of the shortest periods of time of a particular coat of arms, English royal coat of arms. Sad, really, isn't it? But then we have the, in 1816, after the Treaty of Vienna, the electors of Hanover ceased to exist. They'd actually ceased to exist when Napoleon abolished the Holy Roman Empire back in the early 1800s. That. But in 1816, they decided rather, if they weren't going to be electors, they'd rather be kings. So instead of an electoral bonnet, they put on a crown representing the Crown of Hanover. And that was then used from 1816 all the way through George IV and William IV to 1837. The problem in 1837 is that Queen Victoria was a woman. And Hanover had Salic law, so they couldn't have a female monarch. So she lost the Hanoverian coat of arms from her coat of arms, and we went back to this late Stuart version. No, sorry, we have the lion, the leopards, Scotland, Ireland, just like that. And her husband, because you see his coats of arms around, he quarters the English royal coat of arms, the arms of Saxony. And the arms of Saxony have those black and yellow stripes. And then across it, what is supposed to be a a representation of a crown of rue, the herb rue. And this is because at an important coronation in the early Middle Ages, the ruler of Saxony got too hot, and the Holy Roman Emperor took off the crown of rue which he was wearing and gave it to the ruler of Saxony to keep him cool. And it's now commemorated in the Saxon coat of arms. And then the English royal coat of arms remained the same from Victoria all the way through to George V. And Queen Elizabeth made one little change. She had a more conventional Irish harp rather than a harp with a naked woman on it. And that is now our coat of arms today. Her son, as Prince of Wales, has a label, so that white bar across the top with the little, that's called the label, and that's used to denote somebody who is a son of the monarch. And in the middle, he has the coat of arms of the Principality of Wales, which is, it is in fact, sorry, it's on my notes here. It's the arms of the princes of Gwynedd, including Llewellyn the Great. You have those 4 lions. So that's Prince of Wales, he has that. His son also has a label to show that he's a son, and in the middle, to distinguish it from other labels, it has a scallop shell. And the reason for that is that his mother, those are her coat of arms, she has scallop shells on her coat of arms, so he commemorates his mother in his coat of arms, which is rather charming. That's all I'm going to say about the English royal arms. I'm going to move on, I'm going to do a little bit on sort of just heraldry and a few nerdy little bits, which I find quite interesting, always a mistake. And then we'll look at some of the coats of arms that you see around the City of London. The important thing about heraldry is that it's not just pretty pictures on shields. It is that, but what makes heraldry different from what went before is that the images that you have on your coat of arms go from father to son. They are associated with a particular family, and the right to bear those arms descends through the family. And the first time that happened was this chap, Geoffrey of Anjou, who was knighted by Henry I. And in fact, Geoffrey of Anjou was his son-in-law. Geoffrey of Anjou was the man who married the Empress Matilda. And he was given a shield, and if you look at the slide, with, in fact, gold lions on a blue background. And what is very exciting is that his illegitimate grandson, William Longsby, who was actually the founder of Salisbury Cathedral, on his grave in Salisbury Cathedral, this is a Victorian illustration of it, has the same lions on the shield that his grandfather had. This is the first example we've got of a coat of arms descending from in this case, grandfather to grandson. And again, we have a picture of them by Matthew Paris, who liked drawing these things. So that's the first example of arms descending, and they're called a coat of arms because the Crusaders would wear a surcoat, a cloth coat over their armor, and their arms would be painted on the cloth. And so it was a coat with their arms painted on it, so it was a coat of arms, and that's why we talk today about a coat of arms. And just a few things you need to know about coats of arms and the language of heraldry. Everything is described back to front. So when you look at a shield and you look at the dexter side, the dexter, which you know is Latin for right, is on the left. Because if you're behind the shield, it's on your right. So it's rather like being in the theatre, where stage left isn't where you think it is. Although I can't remember whether it's where you think it isn't if you're an actor or audience, but it's one way or the other. If there are any theatrical people here, let me know. And so Dex is on the left, Sinister on the right, and the Dexter side is the important one. So the upper left-hand corner of the shield is the important bit. And actually, that's the way we read. We start on the left and we move to the right. So that's all good. And animals always face to the Dexter side unless there's a special reason to the contrary. And it's always what's described first in the blazon. The blazon is the bit that describes the coat of arms. And the big disappointment with heraldry, everybody thinks heraldry is some secret code. And it's not. It's not a secret language where people in the know can read it. What that means is there are a small number of features in a coat of arms that have a significance that you know if you know about heraldry, even if you don't know about that coat of arms. Particularly indications of whether somebody is a son or a father and whether they married somebody important. Some other features on a coat of arms can be guessed. So if you have a picture of we'll see it a bit later, a picture of a pig on a coat of arms, you can guess that the family's name might be either Pig or Hog. And it's called canting arms. But on the whole, the reason why the heralds and that family chose that image on the coat of arms is personal to them. And unless somebody wrote it down, you really haven't the faintest idea. Quite a few of the arms that we're going to look at, you can tell, but that's just the coincidence of the arms I've chosen to show you. Colors. They're called tinctures because in heraldry, we always have to talk bad French. And you can see they're called gules, azure, vert, sable, purpure, and then ore and argent, gold and silver are called metals. Gules comes from the same root as the word gullet, so it's red. And the one I really like is vert, which means green, from the French word vert, which means green. And in French heraldry, the word for green is sinople. So they don't say vert in French. I just makes it worth being French, really. I'm not, but if I was, it would be. And then they also have furs. This is called ermine. And you can see it represents, and what I like is if it's in the plural, it goes back to front. So black and if you reverse the colors, ermines is white on black rather than black on white. And another fur is called vair. Those of you know about Cinderella, she wore a pantoufle de vair, a fur slipper made of this particular sort of fur. And of course, when it was translated into English, they got the wrong sort of vair. They thought it was vair as in wine glass. So she wore a glass slipper, not a fur slipper. But what's this pattern got to do with fur, you may be asking? It just looks like blobs. This is a photograph of squirrel skins, the Northern European red squirrels, quite a dark red. And in the winter, it molts and its fur is bluey gray, and they have a white tummy. And so when you take the fur off and hang them up, that's what they look like. And it looks just like there, the heraldic there. I think that's really cool. And most exciting of all, Geoffrey of Anjou, the lining of his cloak, look at it there. That's there. So it's lined with that. And if you're really into these things, if you have little there or mini there is just the white bit. So very, very expensive white fur comes from squirrel tummies, which is white, and it's called miniver. So if you like Mrs. Miniver, the film, that's where it comes from. And then we have, and I just thought I'd show you, there are lots of pictures of the way you divide up a shield. These are called ordinaries, the big shapes, cross, because it's a cross, pale, because it's like a pale on a fence. The really one I really like is a chevron. We all know about a chevron, the arrow pointing upwards. That comes from the word for goat in French, a chèvre. And if you've ever looked at a goat closely, you'll see that its back legs look really awkward and they stick out really oddly. And so the word for a rafter, which is a really oddly shaped assemblage of wood in a roof in French, is chèvron. And that's where, the shape is actually very similar to a chevron. So the chevron comes from a goat's back legs when used in a roof. And a saltire, that cross shape, actually comes from the word saltire, to jump, and it comes from an old word for a stirrup, because in the old days when they made a stirrup, they made a cross and then a loop on the bottom. And so that was actually the shape of a stirrup, and using which you could jump onto your horse, hence saltire. So there you are. I'm not going to tell you about the other ones. Lions, I did talk about lions. And lions are hugely popular in heraldry because they're brave and they're the king of the beasts. And who doesn't want to have a lion as their symbol? And so because when you've got a coat of arms, it has to be different from anybody else's coat of arms. So when you pass it down to your son, it's when you've died, only your son has it. When he dies, only your grandson has it, and so on. And so lions have lots of different shapes. These are their main attitudes: rampant, passant, statent. They can be salient, which is when none of their legs, because it's all about how many legs they have on the ground. So a lion statent, standing, has 4 legs on the ground. A lion passant has 3 legs on the ground. A lion rampant has 1 leg on the ground. And a lion salient has 2 legs on the ground and 2 in the air, and it's just about to jump. And there are various other less common shapes of lions, and then which way it's looking. If it's looking ordinarily to the left or right, as we call it, that you don't mention that, but if it's looking out of the shield at you, you call it gardant, because garde means the French for to look. Regardant means it's looking backwards. And then they have there are about 8 different ways the lion's tail can be described, and it can be single or double, it can be up, it can be down, it can be between its legs. And so there's about 60 different lion shapes you can have, and that's before you move on to lions with 2 heads. And so that's everything. And the important thing, as I said before, a lion passant gardant. So 3 legs on the ground, 1 leg up, looking out at you. That, for reasons which nobody knows, is called a leopard. And that's why the English rugby team is supposed to be leopards rather than lions, or is it the women? I forget. The other animal I really like is the martlet. The martlet is a bird that has no legs. Because when you think about a martlet, it's actually it's a sort of a heraldic mixture of a swallow, a swift, a martin, and you can see a martin, house martin, the same root, and you never see a swallow or a swift or a martin standing up, do you? They're always flying, and therefore in medieval times they thought they had no legs, so a martlet has no legs. And you know the bit in Macbeth, you know, this guest of summer, the temple haunting martlet, does approve by his loved masonry that the heaven's breath swells wooingly here, and so on. So he loves, as Duncan saying how nice martlets are, just before he got murdered. And we do see martlets. This is a shield belonging to a man called William of Valence. He's actually buried in Westminster Abbey, but you see he's got a little row of martlets all the way around the edge of his shield. And why do you think he's got martlets there? Valence, if you pronounce it badly, is volans, which means flying in Latin. And what do martlets do? Because they have no legs, they fly. So you see Valence, volans, William of Valence has martlets, and in fact that's his shield on his tomb in Westminster Abbey, and that's the bigger version, which is, we get very, if you know Westminster Abbey, you get very excited about this. The look on your faces, you obviously don't know Westminster Abbey, so let's move on. This is a family called Arundel. And why do you think they've got them on their shields? It's not the Sussex Arundel family, they're actually in Cornwall. Hirondelle in French means swallow or martlet. And so Hirondelle, it's a punning coat of arms for the Arundel family. So we get very excited about that. And these are more canting arms, so puns. I told you, you've guessed the first one already. It's hog. The middle one, Coburn. And when you see pike, it's normally a family called Lucy, because Luce is the French for pike. And this actually is the most obscure pun I've come across in heraldry, and it's my favorite, the Mortimer family. This is exciting for two reasons. One of them, it's got a lovely pun, and the other one is heralds find it really, really difficult to describe this shape. So this is basically just called, in English, we'd call this blue and gold stripes, but in heraldry ease, we have to call it barry, or, and azure. So that's the stripes on the bottom. Then on a chief of the first, so that's the top bit, two pallets between two base esquires of the second, over all an inescutcheon argent. So at the top, describing that, they have great fun. But in the middle, you have a white square, and it's just plain. And all around it is yellow and blue. And the blue stands for the ocean and the sky. Because if you're in the Holy Land, because the Mortimers went on crusade, the first Mortimer who had these coat of arms, so he is commemorating the blue sky and the blue sea in the Holy Land. And the gold is, of course, the sand of the desert. And in the middle, what you've got is you've got the Dead Sea. And what is the Dead Sea in French? It's the Morte Mer, Mortimer. Ta-da! Do you think they all laughed when they did it? I don't know. Now, one of the, and so that's enough of these things. One of the things they used to do is, with coats of arms, is you'd have two families or two entities coming together. And the first way they did it is they'd cut two shields in half and glue them together. And so that's called dimidation. And that's why we get these coats of arms, which I think are rather fun. The one on the left is the Cinque-Ports. So you have the English royal arms on the left, or the right, as we call it. And then you have the ships, because the Cinque-Ports provided ships for the Royal Navy. And when they're put together, it looks like lions with the tails of ships. The middle one is Great Yarmouth, again, showing its loyalty to the king with the royal arms there, but they also supplied fish to the royal family, and they're very proud of their fisheries in Great Yarmouth. And so they also had a shield with fish on it, and when you put them together, it's lions with fish tails. Which is all very jolly. And then the third one is actually Edward III and his wife. When they combined their coat of arms, you have the Lions of England, and then she was the Eleanor of Castile, Castilia y Leon, Castile and Lion. So we have a castle and a lion, which are the Spanish, part of the Spanish coat of arms, just shoved together. And then they realized this produces some really absurd results. So dimidation only lasted in the late 1200s into the early 1300s. And they said, that's silly. What we'll do is we'll squish our coat of arms sideways. So when you put them together, it's called impalement. You still have the complete coat of arms. And another way of dividing up coat of arms is through quartering. And we'll start off with the picture. And I'd like you to guess which family this belongs to. It's another pun. So, and what are the gold things? The bows. Bowes Lion. So this is the family of Bowes Lion, the Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother's family. And what happened, in fact, is the family name was Lion. So they had a lion, they had a little surrounding bit, just like the king did, because practically every aristocratic family in Scotland has a lion rampant, the same as the Scottish royal lion rampant, quite often with a tressure around it, but in a different colour. But anyway, John Lyon married Mary Bowes, and Mary Bowes had an enormous amount of money, and in order to inherit her land and her money, he had to change his name to Bowes. So he changed his name, and that's fairly standard in Scotland. But the children quite like being the son of somebody called Lion, because that's nice and brave, so they combined the coat of arms in quarters, so it was Bowes and Lions. And if you do quartering properly, there are actually some rules as to how it all works. You get really complicated. This is actually the Duke of Buckingham and Chandos, who has 719 quarterings. Now, if I had time, I'd take you through them all, but you'll be sorry to learn that we don't. So I'll just do the simple version. Quartering arises with marriage. When you get married and you marry a woman and she has a coat of arms, or if you're a woman with a coat of arms and you marry a man with a coat of arms, you put your coat of arms together, impaling them side by side. So Mr. Cross and marries Miss Circle, and his coat of arms as a married man has hers as well, and same for her. And what you'll tend to see in a grand house, quite often the man will keep his coat of arms plain, just them, and then the woman's coat of arms will include impaling with the man's. But then their children inherit the father's coat of arms, because the rules of heraldry are very unfeminist. But if you marry an heiress, it's all different. And an heiress in heraldry doesn't mean loads of money, unfortunately. It just means that the girl is the only living descendant of a man with a coat of arms. So the only way that he can pass his coat of arms on is through the woman. So she then takes on his coat of arms, and when she marries, instead of impaling them side by side, the husband puts her coat of arms in the middle of his. And so that lower picture there with an in escutcheon, a little shield inside it, an in escutcheon, that is the coat of arms of the husband, because he has his wife's, because they're carrying them on, because otherwise her family coat of arms would die out. And the children quarter the coats of arms. So you divide them into quarters, you put daddy's top left, bottom right, or top right, bottom left, as we call it in heraldry, and the mother's top on the other way around. And then that quartered coat of arms is what gets passed down through the family. And so next time, when the children of this marriage marry somebody else who also has quartered coat of arms, they get put together, and you get them divided into eights, and that's how you end up with the Chandos 719 quarterings. Most families don't bother unless the family that married in, the woman that married in was very important, and then you preserve that reference. But you quite often have more than one child. And the principle of heraldry is that only one person can hold one coat of arms at a time. So when you have a family, so daddy has the coat of arms. Let's make a picture, actually. There's daddy on the left with his white beard, and he's just got the white cross, okay? Eldest son has a label. Do you see it's that stripe with little bits coming down? Let's just do the pictures underneath. That's a white label, he's got a blue one. Second son has a smile, it's called a mullet, and it's actually a crescent. Third son has a mullet, and we're talking about a star, not a hairstyle. We have a martlet, and then so on. And so each child has his own symbol, and the children would keep those symbols. Again, technically, that symbol should be preserved down the family, but it does get very complicated if you're the fifth son of a second son, and so on. Your shield gets littered with these marks of cadency, as they're called. So people normally don't bother. But you do get things like this. So the Dukes of Bedford have a coat of arms like on the left there, or right as we call it in heraldry, with 3 scallop shells and the lion rampant. The Earls of Russell, so Lord John Russell, who was the leader of the House of Commons, who saw through the Great Reform Bill, one of the major reform in 1832, Lord John Russell, he was made an earl. he became Earl Russell. He was the third son of the Duke of Bedford. And so his coat of arms has a little white star. Do you see? I'll just show that it's a mark of cadency to show you come from the third son. His grandson, so the man from 1832 who put through the Great Reform Bill, his grandson was Bertrand Russell, the philosopher, who, as we know, eventually became Lord Russell when his father died, or Earl Russell, and that the earldom of Russell always has that little star. And Lord John Russell was the third son of the sixth Duke of Bedford, and then we go down a few more generations. Ninth Duke of Bedford and their third son was a successful diplomat, became Baron Ampthill. So again, another third son. So we have the star, but this time they put it in the middle of the scallop shell instead of above it. And you can play around and do things like that, but it's yellow instead of white. And the Barons Ampthill do that. So that's how that all works. And the bit that everybody loves is illegitimacy and the baton sinister, or the, I think lady novelists in the late 19th century talk about the bar sinister, because bar sounds about people being debarred. But a bar actually is a line that runs across side to side, and it doesn't go sinister or dexter, it's just flat. And so bar sinister means nothing. It's actually a bend sinister, because it starts in the top left and goes down, and a baton is a short bend because it doesn't reach the edges. And the Duke of St Albans was the illegitimate son of Charles II and Nell Gwyn. The story went that Nell Gwyn was always badgering him to give her son, a title. And Charles was saying, yes, of course I will, and never got round to it. And then one day she heard the clatter of hoofs outside, and he was riding past in his carriage, and she went out on the balcony holding the child and said, if you don't give him a title, I'm going to throw him off the balcony. And Charles II shouted up, don't drop the Duke of St Albans, who now was given this line. I'd love to think that those flowers were orange blossoms because his mother was Nell Gwyn, the orange seller, but they are actually roses. So I'm sorry about that. And then on the others, and royal bastards are always indicated by a bend or a baton sinister. So it starts top left or top right, as we call it, and goes down in that direction. It's what we call a forward slash, if we're talking in modern terminology. But in non-royal families, they use other indications. So Baron Leconfield, his, let's just find just the detail of that. So the Earl of Egremont had an illegitimate son and no legitimate children. His son did well for himself, was made a baron, and so he took the arms of the Earls of Egremont, which are the three lions' heads between the chevron, and they put a border wavy around it to indicate the illegitimacy. And so that's another way of doing it. So quite often a coat of arms with a wiggly line around it means that somebody in your ancestry was naughty with someone important, because you don't commemorate you don't display as a sign of pride in your coat of arms if it was just the milkman. Thomas Becket, he died before heraldry had got going. So these are retrospective things. They're chuffs. In the 19th century, they thought they were called Beckets. And in fact, the earliest reference to a chuff being called a Becket comes from the 1700s. So Thomas Becket having chuffs was a pure coincidence. But interesting enough, the city of Canterbury uses them in its coat of arms, because obviously Thomas Becket's tomb was a source of enormous money to them. And it was the only representation of Thomas Becket that survived Henry VIII's banning of any reference to Thomas Becket when in the Reformation. And on the right, you have the arms of Thomas Wolsey, Cardinal Wolsey. And I just like this because this is an example of how coats of arms are built up. So Wolsey came from Suffolk. He was born in Ipswich, butcher's son. And the cross with a wiggly line, that white cross with a wiggly line on a black background, that comes from an Earl of Suffolk. That type of cross was associated with Suffolk. The blue leopard's faces come from a Duke of Suffolk, a more recent Duke of Suffolk. So again, he's taking his symbols associated with Suffolk in his coat of arms. He was made a cardinal by Pope Leo X, and Leo is Latin for lion, so that red line in the middle is reference to the Pope who made him a cardinal. And then at the top, because he's called Thomas and he's a clergyman, he's got chuffs, referring back to Thomas Becket's arms, so Thomas and a clergyman. And then the red rose, in fact, is a reference to Henry VIII Tudor, not a Tudor rose, interestingly. But you can see that the coat of arms are taken from a number of different things, stuck together. You look at it and you have no idea why it's all there if you didn't have someone who happens to have written it down at the time to tell you. And just to round off, I'm going to whiz through a few of the sort of coats of arms you see around the place in the city of London. The Archbishop of Canterbury always has this Y-shaped coat of arms. It's called a pallium, and it's one of the ecclesiastical vestments which is given to him by the Pope when he's becomes the Archbishop. And then you normally impale it, put your own coat of arms side by side when you become Archbishop. So that's Justin Welby. The Bishop of London, the patron saint of London is St. Paul. So you have two swords, because St. Paul was executed with a sword, and it's his symbol. And then the Bishop of London, Richard Charters, our current bishop doesn't have a coat of arms that I could find. Bishop Charters has a labyrinth in the middle. And if you know about Chartres Cathedral has very famously in the floor a labyrinth. And so that's referred to in Charters' coat of arms, which I find really interesting. City of London, Cross of St. George for England, and then the sword of St. Paul. And I'm going to quickly rush through the livery companies, the Big 12. Because you can see some of them are just random. So the Mercers have this woman coming out of a cloud wearing a crown, and nobody has any idea why. The Grocers have cloves, because cloves are one of the main spices the Grocers dealt with. The Drapers have what looks like sort of the bastard offspring of the papal tiara and Elon Musk's rocket. But that tiara is actually a reference to the Virgin Mary, because in some medieval representations, she wore a triple crown, which is one of the reasons why the popes adopted it. So it's sitting on a cloud with rays of sunlight coming out of it. And somehow that's one of the few Catholic symbols that survived the Reformation in the city with the livery companies. And then we go on to the fishmongers, which is really easy because it's got fish on it. Interesting enough, though, the ones in the middle are fish that were normally salted, and the ones on the outside, the X's, are fish that were normally dried, because there were originally two companies of fishmongers. One did dry fish, one did salted fish. And above they have the keys of St. Peter. And what was his job before he became an apostle? Fisherman. Yeah, well done. The goldsmiths have the leopard's head, which was the very first hallmark in the reign of Edward I. And then they have a big golden object, which is a goblet, and then two little golden objects, which are buckles, to demonstrate that they regulate both big gold makers and small gold makers. The merchant tailors on the right, I really love this. So it looks as though they've got tents and a couple of robes. Those used to have the Virgin Mary inside. So the Virgin Mary used to stand in a little tent, and then she was also represented wearing this rather wonderful robe with ermine lining. And in the Reformation, they took her away, but the tailors were the people who would have stitched that tent and stitched that robe. So they kept the robe and the tent, but no Virgin Mary inside anymore. The Skinners obviously have ermine, so that's skin. The haberdashers with those wiggly blue lines, they were making a big plea to be called the merchant haberdashers. And the use of merchant meant that they had a significant overseas trade. And if you have an overseas trade, you go over the water, and a wiggly blue line represents water. So this coat of arms was adopted when they were trying to call themselves the merchant haberdashers. Unfortunately, all the other livery companies said, "Oi, you're not merchants." So they lost the title merchants, but they kept the wiggly lines. The salters have salt cellars. It's rather boring of them. The ironmongers have little of iron things. What I really like, you've got their supporters, and they're supporters that look like lizards. And you've guessed, of course, they're salamanders. And salamanders are lizards which live in fire. The vintners obviously have barrels. Cloth workers have a teasel, which you use to bring up the nap on cloth, and the hooks with which you hooked the cloth onto a frame when you were treating it. So we get very excited by that. And just to finish off, we've got some coats of arms from various city churches and the like, and where you will try to identify in which coat of arms this is, so which period this would be. So this is St. Bennet Paul's Wharf. And as I say, you always look in the bottom right, and you've got a repeat of the upper left of the English and French coats of arms. So we know that, and it's got the Scottish coat of arms there. So this is the Stuart coat of arms. And we think this is probably Charles II, because Charles II used to attend St. Bennet Paul's Wharf and watch the service from the balcony where this coat of arms is. Then we go on to St. James's Clerkenwell, and you see on the bottom we've then got the Hanoverian arms. So this we know is one of the first three Georges. It's actually George III for what it's worth. And this, very excitingly, St. George's Hanover Square has got the Hanoverian coat of arms in the middle with a crown. So that's after 1816. You can get really nerdy if you're into heraldry. And then we go to Hampton Court and the Tudor coat of arms. And you can see Dieu et mon droit there. More Hanoverian ones on the King's arms. Again, down in the bottom corner, so it's before 1801. And finally, a little puzzle, because this says it's in 1708, and I do church watching, and I was told these were the arms of Queen Anne, because Queen Anne was the Queen in 1708. But you, having stayed awake for the last hour, will know that these are actually the Hanoverian coat of arms from between 1801 and 1816. Because do you see on top, they have the bonnet rather than the crown. And so what happened here, this is a sword rest, which was made in 1708 in the reign of Queen Anne, but they repainted it 100 years later to no doubt show their loyalty to I was going to say to a new king, but to a rather elderly king at that time. So that's it. We've wished through, and given the fact that we were a little bit delayed by technical problems, that's about your hour. And I think it's probably quite difficult, and if people have any questions, they're very welcome to ask them, but it can get a little tricky to do it between Zoom and live. And your best bet is to take a note of my email address and email me a question, and then I shall answer it intelligently rather than rapidly. Oh, a question is, right. Oh, this is the chat, is it?
Yes, I'll read it out. It is from Cameron Bennett. Thank you for an interesting talk. Soon after St. George's foundation, the church spent £5.50 and £20 to obtain the coat of arms, that one. Would you be able to say something about the process they would have had to go through to be granted permission to put up the coat of arms? Who would have had to make the request, and why it cost so much?
Right. I've been asked about the coat of arms. I don't know how much of that you all heard, but the coat of arms above the altar. You can't just go putting the royal coat of arms up all over the place. How did you get permission? And it seems to have cost quite a lot of money. And the simple answer is that I haven't the faintest idea, because although I know about heraldry, I'm not an expert on the display of coats of arms in churches. But what I can tell you is this, that in Church of England's churches, there was a requirement after the Reformation to display the royal arms, because the king or queen was the head of the church. And so that you were required to display the royal arms, and that carried on through until the Georges, and I think it was Queen Victoria who stopped insisting on that. In dissenting chapels, there was no requirement to display the royal arms, but people did voluntarily, and as far as I've understood, without necessarily obtaining permission, in order to display their loyalty. And so the arms here are displayed voluntarily by this chapel. I think also because there are royal connections with this chapel, various members of the Hanoverian royal family would come here from time to time. There are lovely stories about how the Queen and the Princess of Wales would dispute who had precedence, and the Princess of Wales always made sure she arrived late so she could barge the Queen out of the way when she came in, and so on. But so they displayed the royal arms as a demonstration of loyalty, and I don't think they needed to get permission to do that. What normally happens is, if you don't need permission to put them up, but if people don't like you putting them up, you'll go to the Court of Chivalry and they'll tell you to take them down, which happened in the 1950s with a variety theatre in Manchester, which displayed the royal arms outside when they didn't have a royal warrant. But why did it cost so much? Because it has gold leaf on it, or it had gold leaf on it.
Good. Well, thank you, Rowan, very much for that, which was much more than an introduction. It was much more than an introduction, more a comprehensive survey, but very amusingly and entertainingly told. So thank you very much indeed, Rowan. We're over the hour now, so I don't think I will ask for any more questions. As Rowan has invited, perhaps email him if you do have something burning you wish to ask. Next month is Tuesday, 21st of December, actually relates in a way to this talk because it's the history of Royal Saxony. Frank Patterson is returning to give us a lecture on that. And so, of course, we might learn a little bit more about the shield with the rue, that rather strange green arc there. But for the Saxon, actually. The Cransolan, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just in case you're interested.
Frank, we look forward to hearing your talk in December. Do please come. It's a great shame that not many people this evening heard this excellent talk from Rowan, but let's try and do something more for December. So I wish you all now a very good evening, and I look forward to seeing you again in a month's time. So good night, and thank you once again to Rowan for an excellent talk. Thank you very much.